Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you, Thomas, for this invitation. It's a nice opportunity to talk, indeed, about Backlash. And at the United Nations Global Compact, let's call Global Compact will be easier for everyone. Pacte Mondial in French for the one who wants to know. We grant a strong importance to the younger generation and the academic, as you will contribute to shaping the sustainable world and policy tomorrow. So therefore, it's a great privilege, Thomas, and a responsibility to address you today on a subject that touches the core of our mission at the Compact. How can companies advance the United Nations 2030 agenda despite an uncertain economic, political, and regulatory context? What we are witnessing is quite a paradox. On the one hand, the world has never been more aware of the urgency to act on climate change, inequalities, and global instability. In fact, and that would be the only numbers I will give, only 35% of the SDGs target could be achieved by 2030 with the current efforts, and stagnation or even regression on many indicators is worrying. On the other hand, there is an obvious backlash, translating into a pushback against norms, regulation, and commitments that, for many of us, represent the foundation of sustainable progress. Now, when reflecting on the causes of this backlash, we can think of a few reasons. Some of you, and I heard on this morning, argue that current regulation has been too heavy, too fast for certain industry or company to absorb. Others may say there has not been enough education, not enough awareness of the importance to engage in the transformation of business model and the opportunities it represents. But of course, we cannot ignore the broader economic and geopolitical context, inflationary pressures, geopolitical tensions in a weakening multilateral system, and the revival of populist narrative. Is this a shame? Yes. But we can also ask ourselves, isn't this also a natural swing of a pendulum? In other words, history shows us that progress rarely follows a straight line. It moves forward, then backward, and then forward again. In French, we would say, un pas en avant, deux pas en arrière. So, if today we may see some regressions, it is not necessarily the end of the story, and the issues we advocate for may resurge again. And yet, even in this climate of skepticism, we also see resilience in the US despite political headwinds. Some corporate leaders have not abandoned their commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion, or sustainability. The US leaders understand that these are not political fashions, but a long-term imperatives for competitiveness and legitimacy. Likewise, in Europe, there has been no massive decline. Some voices may be louder, some criticism sharper, but the overall direction of travels remain stable. The ones that disengage were, in reality, the ones not really convinced in the first place. Their departure is about the lack of conviction than about the strength of the Agenda 2030 itself. And let me share with you a preview of our latest European study measuring the perception of sustainable development by the population in Europe, and that will be published next week during the UN General Assembly. Our survey demonstrates that European and French citizens in particular are not disinterested in the issue at stake. I can't tell you more at this point, as we will release on next week, but stay tuned and you will have all the numbers. On the contrary, European citizens remain deeply concerned. This matters because ultimately, business does not operate in a vacuum, it operates in societies. And societies, despite political wins, continue to demand responsibility, accountability, and purpose from their economic actors. At the UN Global Compact, this observation is the same. Neither in the United States nor in Europe have we experienced massive departure of company. Quite the opposite. Our network in France continues to grow. Particularly, more and more companies are integrating the United Nations values and SDGs into their strategy at the core of the business model. But for us, it's not a surprise, and as you said, over the past 25 years, the UN Global Compact has overcome many crises, financial meltdowns, political turmoil, and pandemics, and yet it has never been stronger. So let's remember the Kofi Annan's vision that set up the compact. The vision of Kofi Annan was to make companies accountable and to actively contribute to the general interest, which goes behind borders and markets. It was also based on the idea that sustainable prosperity cannot exist without common rules, without an ethical framework, and without mutual responsibility. So the Global Compact was not built on a short-term calculation, but on a universal principle about human rights, labor standards, environmental stewardships, and anti-corruption. These principles do not lose their validity when politics change directions. They endure because they are the foundation of trust, of legitimacy, and sustainable prosperity. And the companies who participate to the UN Global Compact have precisely taken long-term commitment on the SDG issues, ESG's issue more precisely. Now, of course, the role of the state remains essential to drive, to guide, to regulate, but it cannot act alone. In France, for example, the private sector represents up to 80% of employment. This means that no deep economic, social, or environmental transformation will occur without the full participation on the private sector. The 2030 Agenda with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, is precisely the answer to this challenge. It offers a clear framework, a shared horizon, and above all, a common grammar for states, the private sector, and the civil society. And its approach is holistic. A benefit for the climate cannot be accompanied by negative effect on biodiversity or gender equality, for instance. So no one can pretend to fully address all the issues at once alone. This is why partnerships are integrated at its core, and notably between the public and the private. It is an invitation to move forward together and not to give up. So yes, there is backlash, and the balance may not be swinging on our side for now. The task for businesses is not to retreat, but to hold firm, to remain committed to principles that transcend electoral cycles, to anticipate the resurgence of the very issue we see today being neglected, and to build resilience into strategy and operation. And let us not forget, the 2030 Agenda was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be transformative, and transformation is also disruptive. But if we remain committed, as many companies in the US, in Europe, or even in China and across the UN Global Compact already are, then we will ensure that this moment of backlash does not become a breaking point, but rather another step in the long arc of sustainable progress. Thank you, Thomas.